All right, let me ask you a question. What's more important, saying you're sorry or saying thank you? It sounds kind of simple, right? But for some ancient scholars, this was a massive, high-stakes puzzle. So today, we're going to dive into the Talmud and explore this really fascinating and honestly kind of surprising system they built for making these incredibly tough decisions. So let's just stick with that core human question for a second. Imagine you've got two things you have to do. One, you need to atone for a mistake you made, and two, you need to express gratitude for something amazing. Which one comes first? I mean, which one should take priority? It really just sounds like a philosophical debate, doesn't it? Well, for the ancient Jewish sages, this wasn't abstract at all. I mean, not even a little bit. This exact same question played out every single day, right in the heart of ancient Jerusalem at the temple. And for them, believe me, the answer had huge, real-world consequences. And this is what brings us to our central theme today, a really ancient priority puzzle. The sages, they had to come up with a whole system to figure out what matters most, and, crucially, in what order things had to be done. Okay, I want you to picture this. The temple in Jerusalem. It's a bustling, busy place. Now, someone shows up with a voluntary offering, basically to say thank you. At the exact same time, somebody else arrives with an offering they have to bring to atone for a sin. The priests, they can only do one ritual at a time. So, who goes first? And this wasn't just about, being polite or managing a queue. For them, the order itself was packed with meaning. So how in the world did they decide? I mean, it's not like they could just flip a coin, right? No, they developed this incredibly sophisticated logical toolkit, a set of principles they could apply to pretty much any situation that came up. They literally created rules of importance. And what's so fascinating is how they broke the problem down. See, it wasn't about finding one single magic rule. Instead, they identified a bunch of different, often competing values. For instance, did the ritual involve blood? That was seen as a really powerful agent for atonement. Or did it atone for a very specific sin? How about the ingredients? Were they rare, valuable things like oil and frankincense? And finally, was this offering for the whole community or just for one individual? Any one of these factors could be used to make a strong case that one offering was more important than the other. Okay, and this is where it gets really, really cool. The Talmud, it doesn't just give you the final answer, the final rule. It actually shows you the debates. It preserves the arguments, the challenges, the entire thought process. It's like a math textbook that shows all the messy work. So let's take a look at the anatomy of a classic Talmudic argument. All right, here we go. We've got a pretty straightforward case, a bird offering versus a meal offering, which is basically made of flour. So the initial rule, this comes from a part of the text called the Mishnah, it says bird offerings get to go first. Why? Because they involve blood. Seems simple enough. But then comes the challenge from a later part of the text called the Gemara. And it basically says, whoa, hold on a minute. Meal offerings can be brought for the entire community. That makes them super important. Shouldn't they go first? And right there, you see the clash, right? The blood principle is going head-to-head with the communal principle. So how do they solve this? Well, the Talmud gives a pretty direct answer. It weighs both arguments, puts them on the scale, and concludes that, even though the communal thing is a big deal, the fact that the bird offering has blood, that gives it the edge. It's just considered a more potent, and because of that, a more urgent ritual. So the crucial point here is that a hierarchy of values starts to get established, right? In this particular matchup, the visceral, physical act involving blood is considered more significant than the more abstract idea of a communal offering. One principle basically wins out over the other. Round one is decided. But, it wasn't always so clean and straightforward. Let's look at how this system builds. Because the sages absolutely did not shy away from the really tough cases, the ones where the answer was anything but obvious. And that brings us to the really complicated case of the soda. Now, this is the term for a woman who is suspected by her husband of adultery, and she has to bring a specific meal offering as part of a ritual to clarify what actually happened. So the massive question for the sages was, okay, where does her specific offering fit into this whole pecking order we're building? Here's the dilemma. Does the soda's offering get to jump the line ahead of a standard voluntary meal offering? I mean, you've got really good arguments on both sides. On the one hand, the soda's offering feels super urgent. It's meant to resolve a really serious accusation, a potential sin. But, on the other hand, the voluntary offering has those special, valuable ingredients, the oil and frankincense, which the soda's offering just doesn't have. So, what wins out? The urgency of clarifying a sin or the sheer value of the ingredients? And honestly, this is what I absolutely love about the Talmud. It shows its work. You can see the sages trying to figure this out. Okay, attempt number 1. They try comparing it to another case. Nope, that doesn't work. It's inconclusive. Attempt number 2. They argue based on the type of grain, wheat versus barley. That's a dead end too. They try a third angle, and that's also inconclusive. The bottom line is, they just don't have a clear answer. And this, right here, illustrates a core value of this entire text. The Talmud is not afraid to say, you know what, we don't know. It actually records the failed attempts, the logical dead ends. And why would it do that? Because the process, the struggle of wrestling with the question and testing out different principles, that is just as valuable, maybe even more valuable, than just getting a neat and tidy final answer. So what happens when pure human logic just hits a wall? Well, the sages turn to a higher authority. For the really tough questions, they go looking for the final word in their foundational text, the Bible itself. Yeah, they had this belief that the answers to these super intricate puzzles were actually embedded right there in the biblical text, just waiting to be unlocked if you read it carefully enough. It's a major shift, right, from pure logic to intense textual analysis. And here it is, the key. They find a verse in the book of Leviticus. It's describing a situation where a person brings 2 different bird offerings, and the text says explicitly, "And he shall offer that which is for the sin offering first." Now, on the surface, this just seems like a simple instruction for one very specific case. But the sages did something pretty remarkable with this. They took this one single specific instruction and they elevated it. They said this isn't just about bird offerings. This is a paradigm. It's a universal principle. And from this one little verse, they established a massive sweeping rule. Anytime a sin offering is brought with another kind of offering, the sin offering, that act of atonement, always, and I mean always, comes first. So, problem solved, right? We have our universal rule, straight from Scripture, case closed. Well, not so fast. This is the Talmud we're talking about, and it's never quite that simple. So what happens? What do you do when another verse in the very same Bible seems to say the exact opposite? And here is the final puzzle. It's about a woman after childbirth. She also brings 2 offerings. But, and this is a huge but, when the Bible lists them, it mentions her burnt offering before her sin offering. This is a direct contradiction of the universal rule they just worked so hard to establish. So what gives? Is this an exception to the rule? Did they get the whole thing wrong? The resolution comes from a sage named Rava, and it is just so subtle and so brilliant. He says, look, the contradiction is only on the surface. The order that you see in that verse, that's just for the purpose of reading it. But when it comes to the actual practice, what they did in the temple, the universal rule still stands. The sin offering gets sacrificed first. He totally reconciles the 2 verses by making a distinction between how something is written and how something is actually done. So, after all of that debate, all that logic, all that textual deep diving, we end up with a pretty clear hierarchy, a definitive pecking order. Right at the top, the sin offering. Atonement is priority number 1. After that comes the burnt offering, then the bird offering, valued for its blood, and finally the meal offering. And this isn't just some random list they came up with. It is the end result of an intense, rigorous, intellectual journey. And all of this really leaves us with a final big picture thought. What does it mean for a system of law, for a way of thinking, to value the argument itself, sometimes even more than the final answer? We've seen a system that preserves its toughest, most unresolved questions, and that shows every single step of its work. It's just a powerful idea about the importance of the process, of the debate, of the journey itself. And it really shows that sometimes the most valuable thing isn't just finding the answer, it's about learning how to ask the right questions.